Cronkite reporting. A restrictive wall of barbed wire and concrete rose to divide the tenth city of Berlin in 1961. The wall symbolized not only division, but the desire of communism to push back the frontiers of freedom in all corners of the globe. The communists chose Berlin to instigate a direct clash, to threaten unleashing the forces of war in a manufactured crisis and bring the West to its knees. But free men took up the challenge. As part of the action taken to halt the communist thrust, the United States summoned units of the National Guard, along with other reserves. This is the story of the mobilization that took place to prevent a war, not to fight a war. This is the National Guard story for the record. The Cold War period passed to new shoulders in January of 1961, while the Soviet Union and Communist China behaved increasingly more hostile. Responding to these worldwide threats, incoming President John F. Kennedy told the American people they must make many sacrifices in a long struggle.
In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Time, the American people would just go about their normal day-to-day preoccupations, a little more aware, perhaps, of increasing Cold War tensions, confident in their country's ability to deter enemy aggression. The Cold War also brought forth a need for strengthening conventional military forces. In the nation's capital on July 25th, President Kennedy moved to bolster our conventional warfare fighting capacity. He called on the National Guard and other reserve forces to stand by for a possible call to active duty. He went on to say this.
And let me add that I am well aware of the fact that many American families will bear the burden of these requests. Studies or careers will be interrupted. Husbands and sons will be called away. Incomes in some cases will be reduced. But these are burdens which must be borne if freedom is to be defended. Americans have willingly borne them before, and they will not flinch from the task now.
During the hot summer months, the Berlin crisis smoldered and threatened to erupt in full flame. The communists built their wall to imprison Germans in the Soviet sector and to threaten liquidation of Allied rights in the divided city. Now it was time. The United States would respond. From the Pentagon, word was flashed to the governors of the states and to state adjutants general, advising them of specific units of the National Guard needed to help put the active army on an immediate combat footing. Unit commanders, in turn, received their orders and passed the word along to the men. For the fifth time since 1916, the wheels of mobilization were rolling for members of the National Guard. In October, 21 years to the month since the mobilization which preceded U.S. entry into World War II, the civilian soldiers called to the colors left their jobs, their homes, their families. They exchanged their customary business and work clothes for service in military uniform. In all, some 155,000 reservists responded to enable the country to quickly meet primary requirements in Europe. National Guard combat and combat support units were available to take the place of active Army units rushed overseas to reinforce our 7th Army. Intensified training programs were undertaken. Within 3 months, such National Guard outfits as the 32nd Infantry Division of Wisconsin and the 49th Armored Division of Texas would be pronounced ready enough to be included in STRAC, the Strategic Army Corps designed for fast deployment anywhere in the world. A few days after their call-up in October 1961, elements of the Air National Guard under control of TAC, the Tactical Air Command, took part in the greatest mass movement of single-seat fighters across the Atlantic since the days of World War II. and every Air Guard jet made it safely and on time. Air Guard transport squadrons went to work hauling tons of air cargo over both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans to overseas destinations. From the Air National Guard came a variety of specialized units to back up flying units. Air Guardsmen deployed to bases in France and Germany helped build up tactical air support forces in NATO virtually overnight. The dramatic deployment of the Air National Guard won wide acclaim. Secretary of the Air Force Eugene M. Zuckert said, "The manner in which the deployment was conducted so soon after recall could only be the result of sustained superior performance. It is my desire that every man in your organization knows of the pride the whole Air Force feels in this accomplishment." In the dark days of the crisis in Berlin, the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment left its home station at Fort Meade, Maryland, and loaded aboard troop transports for the trip to Europe. This was one of the units which helped bring the 7th Army up to combat strength. The overseas deployment of the 3rd Armored Cav was made possible by the ready now status of the 150th Armored Cavalry Regiment of the West Virginia National Guard. The 150th Armored Cav took over the STRAC role of the 3rd at Fort Meade. During the winter of 1961-62, 3 reinforced battle groups of the 4th Infantry Division from Fort Lewis, Washington, were flown to Germany to take part in maneuvers, exercise Long Thrust. This movement, too, made possible at least in part by the ready now status of elements of Wisconsin's 32nd Division at Fort Lewis. During February 1962, combat units in Europe were inspected by observers from National Guard units on active duty. These observers got a first-hand view of readiness of American forces overseas. They saw the equipment, the troops, and the terrain. They saw the wall, and they returned to their units to tell what it was all about. At Fort Devens, Massachusetts, guardsmen of a signal battalion asked questions about the wall which now divides the city of Berlin.
Talk about this wall. Everything seems to center around the wall. Just what is this wall? How big is it? How far is it?
The wall is, it's about, I would say, 6 feet high, about 12 to 18 inches thick, concrete. And then on top of it, stanchions which prevent anybody from leaping actually over the wall, because if they weren't there, you can probably pole vault that thing. And this wire is put up there mainly for that reason. But this wall goes through only East and West Berlin. When it gets out to the countryside, it thins out to a barbed wire fence along the border, which divides East and West Germany.
All these men is that there is a direct clash of interest in a major area, which is Berlin and West Germany. There also is increased tension in Vietnam. When we came into office, we did not feel that there was sufficient strength in our conventional forces. Of the 14 Army divisions, 3 were training divisions. And the United States has commitments all around the world. Now, while we rely on our nuclear weapons, we also, as I said, want to have a choice between humiliation and a Holocaust. And therefore, we believe that calling these men up and their willingness to serve increase the chance of maintaining the peace.
And a war was prevented, at least in this particular moment of great crisis. Officers and men of the National Guard had helped answer the communist challenge. They had made sacrifices, but this has been the way with guardsmen for over 3 centuries. They filled a vital role in a critical period, and they did the job they'd been trained to do. They played a part in showing the communists that we mean business. They stand now in the front ranks of those Americans who have answered the challenge of the question, what can you do for your country? In the 1961 call-up, men of the National Guard showed what they could do for their country.